really like your garden here, and what you're talking about with the sustainability sounds really, really compelling. I've got a pretty big place, and I spend most of my time mowing the stuff down. How can I have something like this?
It's a good question. I mean, actually, most people totally struggle with their landscapes. They see it as a battleground, and they don't know what to do to get themselves out of it. And so gardening and maintenance are not that much fun for most people. I call that adversarial horticulture, which means you're basically doing war with your garden to keep it under control. So why is that? Well, one of the principles of sustainable landscaping is what we call, what they call in biology, homeostasis. Homeostasis means that a living system has checks and balances within it to keep it under control, kind of like Congress in theory. Although it works a lot better in nature, frankly. And so here's how it works. If you have, say, a weed problem, for example, well, why do you have those weeds? What caused those weeds to be there? Well, they filled a niche that wasn't being filled by anything else. If you take a proactive stance and you fill that niche with a desirable plant, which then shades the ground, takes up the moisture, the nutrients, and the resources that the weeds would otherwise be getting, once that plant is mature, there won't be any weeds in that area. If you expand that out to the whole landscape and you create a living ecosystem that is full of those homeostatic qualities, then you're not going to have to do so much like you're mowing, for example, because you've got a system that's working properly. Most landscapes are not set up as an ecosystem. They're just set up willy-nilly, decorative, what I call the Saturday morning syndrome. You go to the nursery, you buy a plant, and you come home and you try to find a place to put it. There's no system to it. It doesn't make any sense. By really doing what I call deep design, which is designing a landscape so that it is a living ecosystem, so that it has a homeostatic quality to it in all of its aspects, you're not going to have to fight that landscape so much. Your mowing, your weeding, your pruning are all the result of having a system that isn't working. That's why you're working, because the system is not working. So what do you want it to be? Do you want it to be your work or the work of the landscape itself? It's a simple question. It's not asked enough, and it's not answered very well by most landscapes. So the question, of course, is how do we do it? Well, let's take, for example, pruning. If you're pruning to control the size of a plant, okay, which we all accept, this is normal. In fact, we accept adversarial horticulture as being normal. This is just what we do. If we have land, we have to fight and struggle and go out every Saturday and work our fingers to the bone, and that's just not true. That's not true at all. So let's talk about pruning for a minute. If you're trying to control the size of a plant, there's a reason for that, and the reason is that plant is too big for the space that it's in. Who picked that plant? Why didn't they pay attention to the ultimate size of the plant at maturity? It's a key question. Let's say you want a 6-foot tall plant. Don't pick one that gets 30 feet tall and cut it back constantly. Pruning is about directing growth in a very subtle way. You shouldn't have to do very much pruning for most plants. Pick a plant that's the right size, right plant, right place, as they say in horticulture. Give it the conditions it needs and leave it alone. Now this has cost implications as well, because let's say you're actually paying your gardener to prune that plant. All right. Let's say we have a 5-foot tall shrub that the gardener is keeping in typical gardener fashion, unfortunately, sheared into a square or a sphere.
Or a poodle.
Or a poodle or whatever. And it doesn't really even look that good. But everybody accepts that. I mean, you see landscapes that are all geometrically sheared, and sometimes there's an art thing that's nice, but mostly that's just done because, wow, these plants are getting too big. Tell the gardener to do something. The gardener gets out the hedge clippers and turns it into massive green geometry. There's really no need for that, okay? And cost-wise, check this out. If your gardener spends 15 minutes trimming that shrub, and you're paying him, say, $35 an hour, which is about the going rate here for a real professional gardener, you're looking at about $10 with the hauling and the dump fees and whatnot to manage the size of that plant. You don't just do that one time, because you can't train plants like you can train the dog. They're going to continue to try to get big because they have a genetic destiny to do that. That's what they're going to do. So, and a month later, you've got to do it again. And then a month later, you've got to do it again and throughout the entire growing season. For us, that's virtually 365 days a year. If you're in a colder climate, it's shorter. You're still paying over and over and over again. We calculated here that in Southern California, and of course your mileage will differ depending on where you are, because of our long growing season, if you're trimming a plant 10 times a year and it's costing you $10 per trimming, that's $100 a year. If you do that for 20 years, okay, that's $2,000. $2,000 to prune a plant that might have cost you $20 to put in the first place. Okay? Now, that's one plant. Let's say you've got 10 of those. Let's say you've got 100 of those. A yard full of plants like that, which a whole lot of people do. Now, you don't notice that all these thousands of dollars are leaving your bank account, slipping out of your pocket for no good reason. Imagine if all of those plants had been the right size and you didn't have to do anything except enjoy them, which is what we're supposed to do. Because when we think of a garden, we think of a beautiful place that's like this: serene, peaceful, calm, beautiful, easy to live with. The reality is that oftentimes we are doing war with our own landscaping. We're fighting it all the time. It's noisy, it's polluting, it's expensive, and it doesn't have to be that way. By choosing sustainable landscaping, by simply doing things right, and that's all that sustainable landscaping is, you end run all of those problems. You don't have those problems anymore, and your costs go way down. Okay? Now, does it mean you have zero maintenance? Of course not. There's always some cleanup, there's always a little pruning, there's always a little watering or whatever. There's no such thing as a zero maintenance landscape. If you want that, move to a high rise and let somebody else deal with it. But we can get the cost down and the effort down to a small fraction, usually about a fifth, and this has been proven. And we can talk about this sometime in a real place where they've taken two gardens and compared the two over several years. And the sustainable garden compared to a traditional garden, which is lawn and high water use plants and no mulch to keep the weeds down and so forth, the cost difference is about 5 times, which means the sustainable landscape costs you 1/5 of what the traditional landscape costs. There is no reason not to do this, even if you don't like the environment for some reason and you eat spotted owls for breakfast just to be spiteful. It doesn't make any difference. Even if you're just a cheapskate, you should do this because it's cheaper. So there's no downside to this whatsoever, and there's so many positives that it just doesn't make sense not to do it.
Well, I definitely fall into the cheapskate category. Is there any way that we can go about turning our expensive ornamentals into a food forest?
Absolutely. Now, let's talk from the beginning. You've got something now, and you feel that let's just talk about cost, although obviously all the other benefits accrue as well. When you start doing things right, and you do them right on all levels, you start getting all the benefits. But just from the standpoint of cost, let's say you're concerned about cost. And we're all cheapskates these days. I mean, let's face it, the economy right now has put a lot of people into the category of cheapskate who might have been spending a lot of money 2 or 3 years ago, and that's fine. Where do you start? You've got a yard that has a lot of turf. You've got a yard that has a lot of inappropriate plants. They're too big. They use too much water. They need constant pest and disease control, constant care. How do you get a grip on this? Well, there's a plan for this, and we call it the bootstrapping plan, and it's starting with the things that are behavioral. Let me give you an example. Let's say your water bill is too high. Okay?
$385 last month.
Okay.
And it rained.
Okay. And as it gets hotter, it's going to be even higher. So how much of that water bill is necessary for the plants and how much of it is waste? Well, studies have shown that 50% or more of applied water in a typical residential landscape is wasted. It's unnecessary, and it's either wasted through overwatering or through runoff or the water drifting out of sprinkler heads, which atomize the water and make it all blow away.
Whoa.
Waste. It's everywhere. Like
60% of residential water goes onto the ground outside. You mean that we're wasting 30% of our this? We don't have any?
Exactly. And that's not just true in Southern California. That's true all over, well, anywhere they garden, all over the United States and all over the world. Why? Because of bad water management, because people simply don't understand how to water. And it's fun to water, right? I mean, you get out there a hot day and you stand around with a hose or you turn the sprinklers on. We like everything to be wet. We're not asking the question, what do the plants like? That's the question to ask. So let me go back to this saving money thing. Okay, we start with behavioral things like turn that controller down. You know, why is it set to water 4 times a week? Those plants probably don't need that much water, and that's a really, really important thing. Here's a little trick. Okay, turn the controller off, note what day it is, and watch how long it takes before your plants begin to show little signs of stress, that they actually need water. Not when you thought they needed water, which might be at day 2 or 3, but they might go 5 days, 7 days, 10 days, 20 days. They will not just fall over dead instantly because you turned that controller off. People are afraid to do it. Now, you want to keep an eye on things as you do this, but let me tell you something. When you do that, or you turn the controller down, you begin to learn the actual water needs of your plants. Your plants will tell you when they need water. There are simple signs of drought stress, like leaves curling down, losing a little sheen, not growing quite as much, losing some of the older leaves. Those are the early signs of drought stress, and you can actually see those coming and see that water need coming. And then you can readjust your controller for appropriate watering. That's one simple step. It didn't cost you a penny. If you don't have a controller and you're doing it by hand, simply do it manually. Just back off the watering and watch and see what happens. Didn't cost you a cent. Check your water bill next month. Instead of $385, maybe it'll be $200. Okay? Now, this is where the bootstrap thing comes in, okay? You start with that, and let's say you save $100. That's a reasonable thing to expect given your particular circumstance, because $385 is a lot of money for the cool place. You have a big place, but let's cut it back, and let's say we just save you $100 every month, and that's an average, and so that's $1,200 a year. At the end of a year, you've got $1,200 that you didn't have before. It's in your bank account. Okay, so instead of going out and spending it on, you know, a new car or something, put it in the bank, save it up. At the end of the year, you've got enough money there. It's not much, but it's enough to then go to the second stage, which is what we call minor infrastructure changes. What does that mean? Well, let me give you a couple examples. If you have a sprinkler system, an overhead sprinkler system, and it's got little spray heads that shoot up and shoot maybe 15 feet, very typical system, you can actually replace the nozzles now with a little mini rotator nozzle that has a much lower, what we call a precipitation rate. And that just means it applies the water more slowly. And it's in streams. They're very pretty. They come out and they rotate around, and the streams follow each other. It doesn't blow away as easily. The coverage is more even. It's putting the water on more slowly, so it's not running off onto the sidewalk and into the street. You're going to have still further reductions in your water use. So you spent a little money. Maybe you spent a couple $100 on nozzles out of that $1,200 that you had. Then maybe you get a smart controller. A smart controller is an automated irrigation controller. It's different from the one that you may have on your property now, which is just a timer, and you set it for Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 6 in the morning, and these valves come on for a certain amount of time. The smart controller works completely differently, and here's how it works. It actually gets signals from a weather station, which could either be up on the eaves of your house or somewhere else on the property, or it could actually be a community weather station that's sending signals to a central computer. Then that set of weather station signals is translated into a watering program that's, believe it or not, is beamed up to a satellite and is downlinked to your controller, which has a little antenna on it. This is real space-age stuff, watering from outer space, and it reduces water use by 25, 50% or more in some cases. What that means is you're going to spend a few $100s on this controller, and now your water bills are going to come down still further. So these are examples of second stage minor infrastructure changes. Now you're going to bank that money again for a year or two, and it's going to start to bootstrap or pay up a way to make more ambitious changes, like maybe reducing your lawn area or getting rid of your lawn entirely, or doing something with those areas that you're mowing and weed whacking now, put them in production, get some fruit trees growing, get something going there that will take up the water, sunlight, and nutrients that are now being used to grow weeds. And all of a sudden, you're really now rocking with a beautiful new landscape. It hasn't cost you anything if you're willing to just wait it out and bootstrap it through on these changes. So even if you're not only a cheapskate, but you're broke, you can still do this step by step, slowly, and it pays off in the long run, and everything you do creates more payoff. And we're just talking money, but there's a whole lot more to it. Obviously, the environmental benefits, the birds and the bees will love it. The water district will love it because you're not using as much water. Your family's going to love it because you're getting food out of it. Maybe you're planting native plants, and so it becomes habitat for wildlife. There's so many other benefits to sustainable landscaping. You're getting all of them in one place, because when you start to do things right, as I say, the benefits go through the whole system.
Yes. Can you tell us some steps, concrete steps other than the bootstrapping that we would be able to take as just homeowners?
Yeah, and it's on one level, of course, landscaping is very complex, and on another level, it's really not. And there are some basic steps that you can just walk through and end up with a sustainable landscape. And the very first step is really a fun one, and that's just doing what we're doing now, hanging out on your land and getting to know it better. Because most people live on their properties for years, whether it's a little tract house or a big place like you have, and they never really take the time to get to know where they are, to get to know what the soil type is, how the sun moves in the sky, where the water goes when it rains. All of these elements. And in the old days, in the ancient days, the Japanese garden designers who designed for the emperors way back in medieval Japan, I understand that they were told to sit on the property for 1 year, full cycle of seasons, spring, summer, fall, winter, watch the sun come up, watch it go down every day, watch how the birds fly through the area, listen to the sounds, notice what the trees do. And only at the end of that year were they able and qualified and understood that land well enough to actually make a design.
Wow.
Yeah, really interesting. Wow. It's kind of like the sushi chef in Japan, where they clean fish for 3 years and then they finally get to make sushi, or maybe cut a fish. That's part of their culture, is doing everything in the most intricate, best possible way. And so this deep understanding of the land is very important. Now, if it's your own house, you can actually do that for a year. You might not be able to sit there every day, but you can observe cautiously, carefully, and attentively what's going on your property throughout at least one cycle of seasons, and then you'll begin to really understand it better than any landscape designer who could ever come onto that property. So I have a thing that I call the world's best design tool, and it's in my book, and I always ask my audiences, what's the world's best design tool when you're doing a landscape design? And people say, a measuring tape, a camera, whatever. And no, that's not it. It's a chair. It's what we're sitting in right now. What do you do with that chair? You sit down in it, and you don't have your friends over, and you don't bring your iPad, and you don't do any of that stuff. You just do what we don't do in our culture too much, is just relax and let it all happen. And if you've ever done this, you know that it's absolutely amazing what happens, because you start to notice things that you never noticed before. Maybe you've been on your property for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and all of a sudden you realize, wow, there's a tree in the distance that's really beautiful, or there's really a lot of noise coming from my neighbor's property, and I'd like to do something about that. All sorts of things will start to flow in. And then you begin to get a better feeling for both where you are, what the land needs, what the space needs, and what you need from it, which is very important too, because you've got to remember that we're doing this for ourselves first and foremost. And so you begin then, while you're sitting, or even better yet, after you're sitting, because the sitting should, I think, just be sitting. You should just be quiet. And then get a clipboard and a piece of paper and start writing things down. What did you notice? What did you see? What are the problems on your land? What are the issues that you have? What do you want from it? What do you expect to get? Because remember, there's a key question here. In fact, this is so important. Let me just take a minute to say this. Most landscapes are designed only for how they look. They're purely decorative. They're gingerbread around the house. So, some people said it's the art of hiding ugly houses with ugly plants. Well, maybe. But the point is this. If you're not asking what that landscape does, and you're just asking what it looks like, you're not asking the right questions. You start with what it does. We'll get to what it looks like later, which, by the way, sustainable landscaping is at least as beautiful as regular landscaping. It's not cactus and gravel, right?
This has proven it to me.
Here we are, right? Is this ugly? No.
This is one of the most gorgeous landscapes I've had a chance to visit in many, many years?
We're sitting under a tree called mountain mahogany. It's a California native plant. It's native to right here. I planted it from a 1-gallon container in 1981. It's been pruned about 5 times in the last 30 years, and it requires 0 water and 0 care other than just a little bit of pruning to take some deadwood out of it once in a while. It's a fantastic example of a plant that not only looks good, but it does something, and it does it at a very low cost, and that's really the heart of sustainable landscaping. Function, minimal impacts, minimal inputs of water and fertilizer and all that, in fact 0 on this tree, and minimal or 0 outputs of green waste and pollution and spraying, drifting off and all that stuff. Okay, so we've got a landscape now made up of things like this, elements like this, whether they're the hardscape, which is the built end of the environment, the plantings, the irrigation system, they all perform a function. Remember, we're talking about an ecosystem here. They actually do something, and when we ask that core question, what is the landscape going to do? What's it going to do for me, and what's it going to do internally for itself? What's it going to do for the environment? What's it going to do for the community? What's it going to do for the birds? What's it going to do for the wildlife? And we answer all those questions, I can pretty much guarantee you that the landscape automatically will also look beautiful. Okay? Doesn't mean you automatically know how to design a beautiful landscape, but once you get function down and you ask the right questions, the beauty will come because you're selecting things that are appropriate for where you are. So these are the core things that you begin with, is a deep understanding of where you are and what is needed to be done here and how does it function? What does it do? That's where you begin. Now, when you move beyond that and you get to the next step, which is actually designing the landscape, that's a little more complicated because we've got our core information, but now we have to turn it into something, and that's where most people really get kind of bogged down because they think, well, I'm not a designer, I don't know how to do this, and in some cases that's probably true. You may not be capable of tackling the entire project. I think one of the important things is to know when to call a professional or to know when to get a good book on the subject, such as, for example, you might guess this, Sustainable Landscaping for Dummies, which has been acclaimed as one of the best books on the subject. Now, in my book, I don't go into deep amounts of detail on design, but it's a good start, and there are lots of other design books that will give you even more detail, and of course, those are easy to find pretty much anywhere. There are a lot of principles to design, both aesthetically and functionally, and how to do things. And yes, it is very complicated. It would be a good idea, once you know where you're coming from on this and what you need, to call in a landscape professional, which would be a licensed landscape architect, a landscape designer, or a landscape contractor whose job it is to create landscapes out of a baseline of ideas like this. And then you can work with their ideas and maybe fill in on your own and work together as a collaborative process.
Owen, I was a landscape contractor, and I know people that are still landscape contractors, and I have a hard time believing that there are a lot of sustainable landscapers out there. They're much more interested in charging $135 a month to spray and then another $100 a month to fertilize. You've already shown me that that's $250 a month wasted. Where do I find somebody that can actually help me?
It's a good question. We're in a transition right now between the era, if you will, of conventional landscaping, that high conflict adversarial horticulture, and a brand new world of sustainable landscaping. And someday, not too long from now, hopefully it will all be sustainable, because frankly we can't afford to do this stuff anymore. So what's happening in the professions is that people, some people, not all people, and you're right, most of the professions are still locked to the past and they're doing things the old way. But there's a huge number of people who are retraining themselves, and I get Google alerts every day on sustainable landscaping, and I can see where this is going. There are people in every community in this country, in Canada and elsewhere, who are learning these techniques and who are becoming adept at this stuff. So it's actually becoming easier to find someone who's a trained professional. There are organizations like the Ecological Landscaping Association, which is made up of landscape professionals who are totally committed to doing things in a sustainable way. They're dead serious about it. They mean business, and we're all learning these skills. This is all new. So none of us really know everything. I don't know everything. I don't know anybody who does know everything. But there are people out there who are very, very committed to this process. So finding those people, can sometimes be challenging. You could start with Ecological Landscaping Association as an example, and interviewing people and asking some core questions about what they plan to do. If they're telling you that you know, they want bare ground and overhead sprinklers, and they don't believe in drip, and they want to put in a lot of high water use plants and tons of lawn, that's probably not your sustainable landscaper. That's not the guy or girl or woman who's going to really be able to pull this off. This is a special new set of skills that we're learning.
Is it possible that you could supply us with a list of references where we could start looking, that we could
Sure.
make available to
Absolutely. And people, organizations, books, videos, everything. What we're doing in this series is trying to be encyclopedic and expand people's awareness and give people the basics of how to make this all happen. So this will all unfold as we continue our conversation, and I'll certainly be happy to make everything available to viewers that there is out there, because we need all the information. And I think once you find that once you begin to actually learn this and process this and get involved, it's so much fun. It's so much more interesting than that old lawn and turf, which was so boring. You're just going to get drawn into this in a really nice way, and you realize, why didn't I do this 20 years ago? Well, it didn't really exist 20 years ago. Here we are, brand new world. You can be part of this. There's nothing mysterious about it. It's basically about doing things right.
Thank you so much. It's really nice to see that people are beginning to accept that you can eat your landscape.
Exactly. And you know, surprisingly, there still are rules in many, many places, in homeowners associations, planned communities and so forth, that you cannot grow food, or you can't put native plants in, and you can't tear up your front lawn, because it's all got to look suburban and proper. And there's a place for proper, and certainly, again, this is not, we're not talking about creating ugly landscapes. Nobody wants that. But that is still the case, unfortunately. And in my book, as a matter of fact, when I mention food growing in this issue, I actually say, you know, if you are really committed to this and you're in a situation, a community or a neighborhood where you can't grow food, and you want to break the rules and put some broccoli out in your yard and go to jail for it or whatever, then that act of civil disobedience is going to help move your community forward. So interestingly enough, I think I have the first dummies book that advocates civil disobedience. They actually went for that. I was quite surprised, frankly. But it's a very important issue. Let me tell you something. Most people don't know this, and it's a shocking statistic, and it's true, and you can look it up. Lester Brown, the World Watch Institute, has done some studies, and they found that there's a 3-day food supply in most urban areas. 3 days. On the 4th day, we're out of food. On the 4th day, we're eating what? Well, on the 4th, each other, or you know, the grass, or we don't know what, you know, ivy or something. That's not going to work. On the 4th day here, I'm going to eat my yard, and I'm going to be able to enjoy the food that I have grown here. I'm also drying things in a dehydrator and preserving things. I'm going to be okay for quite a while. A 3-day food supply is a scary thing. We take it for granted that we can always go to the supermarket and get what we need. And it's all dependent on fossil fuels, it's dependent on cheap energy, it's dependent on stable social conditions, and all those things can change in a moment's notice. So why not create resilience for yourself? And if your neighbors don't understand it, tell them about the 3-day food supply, because it's important, and that will definitely get their attention. So yes, you came up against this 40 years ago. People are still coming up against it today, and we all have work to do to make this happen. Now, the good news is that it's changing all over. San Francisco just recently legalized and endorsed the small farming that's going on in the city. It had been technically illegal. And Oakland and some other areas in the Bay Area, it's now possible, with the blessing of the cities, to grow and sell your own food. Detroit, talk about a stricken city, a place that's got a lot of problems. They're tearing down entire neighborhoods, and they're restoring it to small urban and suburban farms. Okay? But there's another key point here that I think is very important, and that's the average homeowner living in a house like this. This is a suburban house, which I describe or define as a house surrounded by some land. And you've got land north, south, east, and west of the house. The house is usually in the middle of the property. Most of the suburban developments are built on former agricultural land, and much of it is some of the best land in the world for growing food. We're growing ornamentals. Why the heck are we doing that? Why don't we go back and start growing food? We have, as suburbanites, if you will, we have the greatest opportunity of anyone, to create a sustainable system. Because we have land, we have a water infrastructure, we have everything we need to create paradise. That's what I've tried to do here, is create a paradise. And you notice it's not all food. Some of it's native, some of it's ornamental, some of them are tropical, high water use things, as we saw with the fountain and the bamboo. Well, okay. The net total of this is a highly useful, highly productive, and very beautiful landscape. And you can do this too. It's not that hard to do. There's another step beyond that, as a matter of fact, which is getting together with your neighbors, creating what we call a food shed, which simply means your neighborhood is growing a balanced diet for everyone. It doesn't mean you have to do everything yourself and grow every single element and have 130 things like I do. I just happen to like to grow things. Let's say you only want to grow 3 or 4 things, a couple fruit trees, a particular crop that you're interested in. Get together with your neighbors and tune the neighborhood for a balanced diet so that somebody is growing something on their land that's useful for everyone. And then you do what we did here in Santa Barbara. We come together, we bring our produce, usually on foot or by bicycle, to a central location in the neighborhood, which is somebody's garden. I'm going to be doing a garden tour here this Sunday, actually, for what we call used to be called the Mesa Exchange. Now it's the Santa Barbara Food Not Lawns program. We have 16 of these cells throughout the community here. People come together, they meet their neighbors, they bring their plums, they bring their citrus, they bring their broccoli, they bring whatever, they bring seeds, plants, baked goods, anything out of their yard. They share, they enjoy the time, the kids come along and they get to know each other. All of a sudden, people feel so much better about their neighborhood, about their neighbors. They feel safer, they have new friends. So it works on a social level as well. And now we have a community that's sustainable. We don't just have a sustainable landscape, we have a sustainable neighborhood. And then when we go out from there, then pretty soon we have a sustainable city. And this is why the suburbs are so important. If you live in a high density area, like Manhattan or Hong Kong or somewhere like that, where people are packed in, they're put up in high rises, and we're told to believe that high density is an environmentally good thing. It may be, but oftentimes it's not, because here's why. Everything that those people need has to be brought in, and all the waste has to be taken away, and they are helpless. They are helpless when it comes to providing for themselves. They can't grow any food. All they can do is go to the store and get it. Where did that food come from? It came from 100 miles away, or 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 miles away, and it was trucked in or sent in on an airplane. And when it all goes down and our society collapses, if that's going to happen, or even if things just change to where energy is too expensive to do that, we're not going to be able to do that anymore. And those people in the high rises are going to be at a disadvantage compared to those of us who have a little bit of land around our houses, good neighbors, good community relations, and we're building a real living community. That's how good it can get. And that's why sustainable landscaping is important, because it can get just that good. And it's an amazing thing when you live through it. You can't believe how good it can get. And you wonder, why did I ever have a lawn in the first place?
That's amazing, Owen. So we take sustainable landscaping, amplify it, and we can have like a completely sustainable city. That's incredible.
It's all up to us. It's all up to us. What are we going to do next? You know, we all know we're up against constraints. Peak oil, peak water, things are running out. We're reaching all these limits. We're going to have to do something about it. We've got to face reality. A lot of people are living in a fool's paradise thinking that this way of life is going to go on forever. When you look at just fossil fuel, for example, the use of fossil fuel, which started in 1853, I think it was, when they hit the first well, they didn't even know what to do with the oil. They just, I think they made kerosene, and the rest of it they put in the creek because they didn't understand how valuable it was. So 1853, we have now reached peak oil, which means half of the oil that's on this planet that we know of has been consumed. And the second half is much harder to get, and it requires a lot more energy put in to get the energy out of it, because they're having to go deeper and do more and more extreme things, as we've seen, more dangerous things. What that means is oil is going to be much more expensive over time. And oil and fossil fuels are the basis of our entire economy. So we've reached that point where if you think $4 a gallon gas is bad, just stick around, because it's going to be a lot more than that, okay? So we're in this tough situation here, and this is an opportunity. This isn't just about decorating your house. This is much more serious than that. It's much more real than that. This is an opportunity to transform our world. You know, Lao Tzu, and I can't quote this exactly, but the great Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said something to the effect that what happens in one person will then go to the family, and the family learns the skills, and the family learns the right behavior. Then it goes to the neighborhood, then it goes to the community, and it keeps expanding out to the entire world. We can start with this simple thing of our own yard and make all the changes here. And there are certainly plenty of examples of people who are feeding themselves in their neighborhoods off their own little property, smaller than mine. Okay? And then it can go out and out and out. And that's why this is so important. Think about living in a world like that, a world of abundance and safety and delicious food and fun and beauty. We can have that. We can have that soon. We just have to start now.
Wow. That's amazing. Owen, you've given me a tremendous amount of stuff to think about here today. I'm going to have to sit on this for a little while, but you've mentioned such tremendous things. Can I get an agreement from you to take me to show me some of these the differences, the sustainable versus a normal garden, so we can actually look at some of these things?
Absolutely. There's so much I'd like to share with viewers. I mean, this is huge, and rather than just sitting here, let's get out and show people how good it can get, because I'm only scratching the surface on this property. This is not the most sustainable place. This is not the most productive place. It's what I've done over 30 years of evolution. But I can show you some things that will absolutely blow your mind. So let's hit the road.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Owen, thank you very much for talking with me today and sharing what you have. I'm looking forward to coming back in the very, very near future and seeing some more of what you can show me. I would love to see your food shed come together, and I know that we've been able to create a sense of community in our community gardens, but what I can only imagine what you're able to do with a neighborhood of people that actually see each other all the time.
Come over on Sunday and you can see it all happening right here. It's really fun. So
Great.
yeah, I mean, there's so much. People don't really realize how much energy is behind all this stuff and how many good things are happening. So let's go have a look at it.
All right.
All right.
Very good.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Owen.
Appreciate it.
Owen Dell, the master of sustainable gardening. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for being here.